we set out doing that Extremis story, we weren't even certain that it would be a permanent thing, because on one level, it seems like it flies in the face of the concept. And I've certainly heard from, you know, some real hardcore Iron Man fans of days gone by that, no, this isn't Iron Man, because Iron Man's, the whole point is he's got a suit of armor. He shouldn't have powers built into himself. But I think, you know, two things that it had going for it is, one, Warren Ellis is a fantastically talented writer, and two, Warren is Tony Stark. Warren is so far ahead of the curve in terms of reading up on the science. He's so fascinated by the technology and the way it's going to change our society and the way it's going to impact on us individually, that he just got down to the core of it. Tony Stark, as sort of, I think the term that Warren was sort of tossing around at the time was, he's sort of like the test pilot of the future, that he's there, he's the first guy there, and he's going to go out and investigate all the possibilities and see what all this stuff does, and how it affects him and how it could affect the world, and thus, in doing so, sort of beta tested for everybody else. Beyond that, it was beautifully digitally painted by Adi. So it had a really sophisticated, sleek, modern look. It was pretty successful, and it got people interested again, and the character started to pop a little bit, and then consequently we went on and did Civil War and did all the stuff that came after that. And right now, you know, the movie notwithstanding, Iron Man is really poised in a position within the Marvel line and within the Marvel universe where he's like the most important character there is. He's the hub around which everything circles. And it all kind of stems, stepping stone-wise, from the work that Warren and Adi did.
So what happened was Joe Quesada, the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, got talking to me in email one evening about Iron Man, which was a character they were putting new creative teams on once every year or two, and it was never quite working for Joe. This is a character who is a test pilot for the future as his own redemption, which is really the thrust behind the Extremis graphic novel. And Joe responded to that take and said, well, off you go then. He was an arms dealer. There's no two ways around it. While that is what built his fortune, therefore allowing him to be a technologist, he wasn't actually being that at the genesis of the character. He was just a man who made bombs. And he's running away from that. The only way he can look himself in the mirror, as far as I'm concerned, is to be Iron Man, is to be that figure of futurism. After I agreed to take a shot at Iron Man for Joe and develop a new take, the next thing was finding the artist, and Joe, being Joe, already had an artist in mind, was Adi Granov. A comics artist has a lot of very strange jobs. There's certainly the director, to a large extent. Cinematography is something that's often shared between the writer and the artist. I created a character called John Pillinger, who is a television journalist, very much based on John Pilgrim. Because in all those years of publication, from what I could find, Tony Stark had very rarely been brought up to account by the real world. So I wanted someone there to lay it out both for him and the audience. You're an arms dealer. That doesn't mean you just made a couple of bombs. John Pillinger is there to remind him that somewhere in the world right now, someone is dying because of something he's made, and they're never going to let him run away from it. I really wanted to try and ground the character. It's less a superhero graphic novel than it is a science fiction novel, and that to me required Tony Stark to be a real person. He shouldn't be someone who can just put on a costume and fly above his concerns or the concerns of the world. He's a man who made a moral compromise in his youth. It was simply easier and faster to build a fortune by selling arms than it was to do it pretty much any other way. When I wrote Extremis, I moved the timeline on, and I have Stark being struck by shrapnel not in Vietnam, but in a desert location that could very well be Afghanistan. In Iron Man Extremis, Tony Stark is probably not yet 30, and he's a man passionately interested in bringing on the future, but he doesn't really know what that is yet. He's very scattered in the book. He's working on 12 things at once, hoping that one of them will be the golden key to unlocking a future that he can live with. That's why there are so many of us interested in futurism. We don't know which path is going to break. We don't know which one is going to turn out to be the way through the woods. The character Sal in the book was a mentor to Tony and Maya. The thing about Sal in the book that makes him stand apart from both Tony and Maya is that he doesn't have the passion. I think he never really had the passion. I think that's what he admired most in Tony and Maya. It wasn't a huge wrench for him to just say the hell with it to everyone. He didn't have the passion and need for redemption that Tony has. I think the germ of the Extremis process that I created for the graphic novel was reading somewhere a long time ago that the human brain retains a template of what the body should look like, and it refers to that when repairing wounds. And it simply struck me that if that could be hacked, then you could make the body do all kinds of interesting things. Two, some years later, a suit that he could fold up and carry in a briefcase. Two, as you see at the start of the graphic novel, something that has to be shipped in a crate or hangs on chains in his garage, very much going back to the tank model, which made a little sense in terms of the standard process of technological development, which is to make things smaller and more effective at the same time. So attacking it from that aspect and constantly keeping the title of the thing in mind, it seemed to me to only make sense if he was wearing the Iron Man suit, if you like, at all times, that he became an Iron Man, that a large amount of the suit itself was stored inside his body, using what you presume is some kind of nanotechnological process. So it actually fulfills physical functions as well as laying there and potentially inside his body. So yeah, the Iron Man suit is mostly contained inside his bones. Well, with Extremis, it was my job to reboot the character, to reinvent the character and present new situations and conflicts for him, which I think the book did.
I think probably the favorite part in Extremis for me is in second issue when Malin walks into the FBI building, and I think that's where I really hit my stride as a storyteller. I think that's when I started feeling comfortable with just telling or choreographing scenes, and I think the action in it came out quite good. The way I approached the design of the suit in Extremis particularly is I kind of try to add realism to my art, so it looks like something could actually, you know, with suspension of disbelief, actually function. Before our book, the suit was actually always in a briefcase, but then we thought when we did Extremis that how can you fit this giant suit into a briefcase? It just makes no sense. So it was outside of a briefcase, it was actually in a giant crate that would be shipped wherever he needed it. But then when he actually injects himself, then he uses this new suit, which is much smaller, and then I started thinking about memory medals, you know, so it can be folded. This is the kind of stuff that I really think about. So memory medals, so you could fold the suit and fit it in a suitcase, and then because he had some kind of power, magnetic powers, he could actually like maneuver the suit around him to actually then like fit onto him. Well, basically, first time Warren Ellis and I met, it was, I think, right, I was working on whichever the issue came before that. I think it was issue number 3. And I was telling him how much I like the original gray Iron Man armor, because it's just a clunky tank type of a thing. And a few weeks later, I get the script, and he's written that scene into it because, and this is what he said, that he wrote it because I like that suit so much. I'm an illustrator before anything else, and I try to come up with striking images, at least in my opinion, and I try to compose images that will tell a story in a certain way. And when it comes to doing sequential art, comic book pages, I try to serve the story before creating beautiful images, but I try to create beautiful images at the same time, if that makes sense.
Iron Man in Civil War, I mean, ultimately Civil War is a story about Captain America and Iron Man, and to a lesser degree about Spider-Man as sort of the third lower point on that triangle. And it was that from the very beginning, as the story started to crystallize and the basic themes of freedom versus security kind of played themselves out. Those two characters, because they're so central to the mythos of Marvel, and they're both so central to the Avengers and the superhuman community. This is a character who'll do whatever needs to be done and take the weight on himself. That seemed to be a pretty interesting place to put him in Civil War, and to some degree, a surprising place, because again, the knee-jerk is Cap will be the guy that toes the line and Iron Man will not. As the story played out and as we figured it out, we got to the end where ultimately it's got to be the pro-registration side that comes out on top. And somewhere along the line there, one of us had the notion of, okay, where's that going to leave us? Let's put Tony in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. That puts him in another interesting place. It's like running a company, but completely different, because it's a worldwide peacekeeping force. It's more military-oriented, but a lot of the same skills that he brings to running a company on an economic level can be played out against this larger scale thing. Tony became more and more the center point, even beyond Civil War, all the stuff that we went after that, because he was the guy in charge. He was the man with the plan and the guy with the vision, and the guy that across the course of doing these things, putting these plans into place and running into conflict with guys that were his friends, did things that he knew were tough.
Tony Stark is a very difficult character to write, because he's a lot smarter than any writer who's ever going to tackle him. None of us can claim to know how to create anything technical. We're totally faking it. He's also a much more sophisticated character. His lifestyle, his background. I don't know any comic book writers that are trust fund babies that really know that side of society, it's all got to come out of our heads. He's a tough character to write in that sense, but it's also a lot of fun. The Inevitable came out of the relaunch that Warren Ellis and Adi Granoff did, which was a great relaunch, but they weren't using any of his villains. They weren't using any of his rogues gallery, and Iron Man has a great rogues gallery. And those villains specifically, if I could have jammed more villains into that story, I would have. But 3 seemed to be the limit. But I loved those characters. Iron Man has this very specific kind of rogues gallery. They're also technologically based. Whether it's the living laser or the Ghost with his stealth suit, or Spy Master, who's sort of the industrial espionage side of an Iron Man story that's also very interesting to me. So I wanted to bring back those characters for a modern audience. The way I tell these stories whenever I'm doing a sort of historical tale is I always, in my mind, set them in the present. Write them as though they're happening right now. There's a rule of thumb with comic books. It doesn't matter when it came out. Whenever you're reading it, it's happening right now. That's why comics are written in the present tense. Narrative captions, are written in the present tense, because when you're reading a comic, the idea is it's happening right now. So my feeling was the Mandarin is Iron Man's quintessential enemy. His opposite number. Magic versus, mechanical. Technology versus mysticism. It's a great opposite number pairing. But their first encounters didn't have a lot of mythic power. They were sort of one in a series of stories that were being told at the time. I don't think anyone knew that the Mandarin would grow into Iron Man's quintessential foe. Eric Canetti, I've known him for years. We worked together in comics a couple times when he was first breaking in, and always loved his work, but it was so technically precise, and it was kind of a Jeff Darrow kind of thing going on. I just thought, man, this guy is made to draw Iron Man. What I didn't expect, what he did inject into the work, is this life, this movement that comes from his years in animation.
At the moment, Dan and Charlie Knopf are writing Iron Man. Dan was the creator of Carnival, the television series, and does a lot of writing there, and Charlie is his son, young and up-and-coming screenwriter and comic book writer. They sort of picked up the baton from where Warren had left it and have carried it forward, doing all of the Civil War connectivity stuff and all of the Iron Man Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. arc and all of this sort of thing.
Yeah, the Knopfs really brought in a very real-world espionage kind of flavor to Iron Man, which I think was really fantastic, and a real-world sort of tech. I mean, it definitely feel the weight of the world on Tony Stark and on the Marvel Universe within their story. So they've just done a great job of it. I mean, they really are writing it like a TV show.
When I was doing Carnival, I actually turned on some of my staff to graphic novels. I said, I want you to read these to sort of get a sense of the type of storytelling. And after Carnival ran its course, I got a call from, I actually wasn't even, a friend of mine said, hey, I was talking to a guy, he's at Marvel, they really want you to do a comic book. And I talked to them and they said, yeah, we'd love for you to do it.
It's funny because they offer him this thing. And he calls me up, and I know this because he calls me up on April 1st. And, I've been reading comic books since I was a kid. And he calls me up on April 1st. He goes, hey, Charlie, are you interested in doing a comic book with me for Marvel? And I go, shut the F up, man. This is a joke. Why are you messing with me like this,
Yeah, it would be
he goes,
typical.
no, I know, this would be typical him. And he goes, no, I am serious. And, after I changed my pants, I called him back and we sat down and we discussed. And what was the criteria? You said no. I want to do a character.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, they said, do you want to do one of our characters? And I said, well, I'd really like to do one of your characters that's underperforming.
Yeah.
I'd really like you to find me a character that's underperforming, and I'd like one that's a little bit morally ambivalent. And he said, well, how about which one would you? I said, well, my first choice would be Iron Man. I thought, well, they won't give me Iron Man. And then he called me and said, yeah, we'd love you to do Iron Man. And I said, well, okay, if I'm going to do it, I have to do it with my son, because I'm so out of touch with superhero books. And he knows the idiom inside out. And I also knew that I had my plate full with television and film projects. I knew Charlie was talented. It was a little bit of a leap. It was a little scary. I knew I had the craft to help him with his scene work, and I knew he knew the ins and outs and what you can and can't do with a comic book. So he does all the first drafts.
Yeah.
So he carries sort of the, he does the heavy lifting, which is looking at a blank page. And then we break story together. We'll break story, then he'll do the first draft, then I'll sit down and we'll sit at the typewriter and work together. And when I'm making changes, he's learning bits and pieces of craft that I kind of more or less had to learn by myself. It was sort of nerve-wracking because I thought, what if he has no talent? What if he can't do it? And then how do I deal with that? And I certainly didn't want to be sitting there and carrying him. Now, I had the advantage of having worked with my father at one time in a very different business, but I understood the psychological aspects of it. So I'd tread that minefield before. So I knew, I know where there's warning signs, but no, he was able to pick it up right away. You can't teach talent. That's the only thing you can't teach. When we came in, we just want to write a kick-ass book. Yeah. We want to write a book that works. But I think when we came in with, it would be the height of hubris. I mean, look, Warren Ellis is a master. I'm not going to follow Warren Ellis I mean, it's like everything he gave us in Extremis was a gift. Execute program, you could see the curve as we were moving through it. Like, you know, the earlier issues, when we got to the later issues, we're going, you know. They said, just finish your story. You're going to be well into Civil War by the time you finish. And so we kept track of what was going on with Civil War, and we really saw Tony as being Lincoln-esque. We were sort of, when we looked at registration as an issue, if it was real, absolutely. And really, again, I think the idea is that we saw him as almost Abraham Lincoln. That he's behind a cause that's costing lives, that's unpopular, that's costing friendships, but he sticks to his guns.
From what I understand from talking to artists, it's difficult to have expressions with a lot of these superheroes, especially with Iron Man. He's got this big iron mask on.
Yeah, we always go in close to the eye slit.
Yeah, what we really like about both Patrick and Rob is that their expressions are so good. Now, granted, you know, with Iron Man, we have to get in close, like you said, getting close to the iron slit. Rob had this great scene in one of our issues where Maria looks up and she says, what's your ETA? And he goes, right freaking now, and flies over Maria, and he's got this great shot of her looking up, and her eyes are, what the hell's going on? I think that's really important.
What I like about Iron Man and Tony Stark, what really works for me, I mean, actually when I'm drawing Iron Man, I enjoy drawing the Tony Stark scenes more than I do the Iron Man ones. So many of Marvel's characters are radiated and become a monster, or bit by a spider, or cosmic rays. And Iron Man was, I mean, I don't know if you can say you identify with a guy who's a handsome billionaire who gets all the ladies, but he was still a real guy, and he's a self-made superhero. He's a superhero because he wants to be, because he's the engineer as a superhero. You know, he's superhero by design. You know, I mean, that's unique. You know, I love that. The double-edged sword of drawing Iron Man was, on the one hand, you had these supporting characters in Tony Stark who were very emotive and going through extreme emotional strain, and on the other hand, you had to draw a guy with a faceplate whose emotions were hidden beneath the armor. I mean, I enjoy the emotional aspects of it. You know, with Maya and Sal, I thought the Knopfs did a wonderful job with those characters. Some of my favorite scenes were what was going on with them. And I don't know if Daniel was ever aware of this, but from some pictures online I saw of him, I started to base my drawings of Sal off of how he actually looked. I actually think maybe Daniel might be even more extreme looking. I think the picture I saw he had a beret and some braids in his beard, but definitely there was a bohemian approach to Sal that I picked up on from just what I knew about Dan. When you're doing something like Iron Man's armor and you have to draw sideways, front, back, forward, in comics you draw every conceivable angle. Not having that full field of information will actually, by accident, will bring about a style of your own. Fortunately, there are enough people out there still that just love the beauty of like a line approach, you know, as opposed to photorealism. Color-wise, I was really looking for more of a pastel look, so that the openness and the simple lines would come out more. When I was first offered the assignment, I was actually out on vacation with my family, and my editor called on his cell phone and said, you know, how would you like to do Iron Man? And, you know, right away I want to scream, are you kidding? Yeah, of course. And she told me that the Knopfs would be writing it, and that they had done Carnival for HBO. And it just got better and better as far as I was concerned. To me, great comics start with great stories. And these guys, I knew were going to write great stories. When I think about the project, I remember there was an awful lot of research about actual places. They say London, they don't just say London. It's Piccadilly Circle. It's there's a library, a specific library I had to draw a research scene in. There were a lot of places like that where they used exact locations. So you ready to go? Mm-hmm. This is my daughter Genevieve, and she wanted to get on this DVD too. So she did a drawing of Iron Man. As you can see, the Kuberts and the Ramitas have something to look out for here. I think it's pretty impressive myself. What do you think?
I think it's good too.
Great.
So Genevieve, how old are you?
I'm 8.
And how long did it take you to do this?
You spent a couple
I would
hours on
say,
it last night.
Yeah, a couple of hours pretty much.
She came in and said, I want to draw something. And I said, well, why don't you draw one of the characters that Daddy draws?
Then I said yes.
Yeah, so.
Yes.
Do you like Iron Man?
Yeah, he's cool.